Hi everyone, thank you for joining our session today on understanding routes to market in the public sector. We've had over 100 attendees to this webinar, and I hope you can all leave feeling like you've learned something new and you're ready to start scaling up your public sector sales strategy. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Hollie Hodgson. I head up account management here at Tussell. I studied law at university before mastering in environmental policy making, so I truly understand how complex regulations can make people feel inundated with the options available to them. So today we're really going to take back the lens, and I'm going to show you how you can start making data-driven decisions about the routes to market that you're taking. First of all, what is the question that inspired this webinar? So as I said, I head up account management here, and our customers are always asking us, how can we be selling more to the public sector, whether that's at large or within a single account? They always want to know what the best routes for them to take, whether it's going for tenders or frameworks, how to grow within a specific customer or prospect of theirs, and also how have their competitors done it. So we thought this would be a great idea for a webinar. So for those of you who have been in the public sector for a while, apologies for starting off really basic here. What is a route to market? A route to market is effectively the distribution channels that you use to sell your product or service. There's a whole host of available options to selling to the public sector. Some of these are up to the supplier, but you're always subject to the options available to the buyer under procurement rules. We can take these three suppliers as an example. One works in tech, one delivers work, so for example, construction or engineering projects, and the other is focused on healthcare services. Each favors different routes on the market depending on activity in their sector. The tech supplier is rarely bidding on tenders. It offers a unique off-the-shelf software. It often needs to educate the public sector about why they need their product. It's not something that they would typically look for. As such, it much prefers getting on frameworks, so for example, G-Cloud, or offering the software at a price which allows for no tendering, so essentially direct sales there. The next supplier on Works is forever bidding on tenders. Nothing it does is below threshold for competition. It gets on a lot of frameworks. DPS aren't as widely used in its market, and tier 2 agreements are really important. So they actually have a specific team member who's managing those relationships. Next, we've got the health supplier. Again, forever bidding on tenders. DPS are much more used in their market rather than frameworks, as the NHS is always looking to bring in new pools of suppliers, and partnerships rather than tier 2 deals are highly used to allow for collaboration. This avoids having more siloed services. Those are three quick examples, but it's important to remember not all routes to market are up to the supplier. Others are contextual to the buyer and what you're selling. As touched on before, the buyer might not like going out to tender. If you're selling an off-the-shelf software, it's much quicker for them to use a preferred supplier agreement such as G-Cloud, where the terms and price are already laid out there. The product and service might also not be suitable under the purchasing powers available to the authority if the software is too expensive to do on a quote basis. There are also different rules for certain markets. So for example, healthcare and defense. So do keep that in mind when thinking about the requirements to bid. Also, it depends how urgently they need it. And if they don't have time to run a full procurement process, they'll absolutely be favouring the quickest purchasing routes available to them. We really saw that during COVID and the rise in call-offs. They could also be used to using certain frameworks or DPS at the organisation, and that makes them feel much more comfortable in the sales process. So that's the basics of what a route to market is. Now we'll take a quick look at the pros and cons for each of these. Option 1, wait for tenders to be released and respond to them. This is the most basic way of selling to the public sector. It's often favoured by small suppliers and particularly new ones who are trying to see if the public sector is worth their time. First pro, it's low effort. You have clear questions which you're responding to. They also come to you. There's no need to be chasing the procurement leads and the decision makers at the organisation. But a big con, it's fully open. Any single person can be bidding on it, which means it's the most competitive of all of the routes. It's also a very reactive way to be dealing with the public sector. And sometimes it can feel as if a certain tender has been written with a certain supplier in mind who has been involved in a much earlier stage of the project or program. And a final one, you might be waiting for a tender that's never going to come. This may happen if the buyer instead uses a preferred supplier agreement, again, like G-Cloud, which is infamous for having no tenders going via it. Option 2, DPS. It stands for Dynamic Purchasing Agreements. Think about it as being the sister to frameworks. It's also the topic of one of our most recent blogs, if you want to check it out on our website. The difference between a DPS and a framework, they're open for anyone to bid on up until the agreement ends. Big pro, they're always open. If you're finding yourself really short on time and you don't want to rush your bid, you will absolutely want to be favoring this approach. It's also generally easier to join as the requirements are typically very well defined, meaning it's normally very clear as to why you didn't make the cut, even before you start. And if you don't make it, you can actually apply again. But a big con, there's no direct awards which go via a DPS, which means there's competition for every opportunity via the framework. This can mean that it's harder to win. They're also not as widely used in all sectors yet. There is going to be a bigger push on DPS agreements, which we will touch on later with the new Procurement Bill, which is currently making its way through the House of Lords. And building on this, fairly narrow services are procured via them. If your product is bespoke, you're likely to prefer a different route. But again, this should change with the new rules. Next one, option 3, framework agreements. Essentially preferred supplier agreements in the public sector, and the topic of our last webinar with our head of marketing. So please do go check that out. A big pro can be easy to get on, but really it depends on the agreement. For example, G-Cloud has thousands of suppliers. Some actually only have one. Naturally, the latter is more lucrative and harder to win. You can receive direct awards. This is essentially an award which doesn't have any competition. The other suppliers on the agreement wouldn't have known about the need. And building on that, the less competition, as there's only open for a select period of time, unlike DPS. This means that once it's awarded, the pool of suppliers will not change. Big con, some of these get very little use. It's never intended when a framework is set up, but it is something that we really have noticed, particularly with the introduction of our frameworks analysis module at Tussell. We have really seen that some frameworks, the volume and value of call-offs matched to them really doesn't reflect the estimated initial value. They can also have rigid pricing and services under the lot. This means that if you have a service where pricing can be flexible, let's say it's a pay-as-you-use internet service, you probably aren't going to like using an agreement such as network services, where you already have to define these schedules. Option 4, partnerships. Essentially, you will use other suppliers to sell your product or service. So for example, using a reseller supplier to sell Microsoft licenses on your behalf. A big pro, of course, is you can leverage existing relationships in place. There's no need for you to go into cold. You can also get results much faster. It's a really efficient way of dealing with the public sector and really building up your sales. But you do have less control over the delivery of the contract. So you really need to trust your partners, make sure you do a proper selection process. Naturally, you're also going to be taking a hit on the revenue, and the service delivery can be more complex. One supplier might be providing the license, but then you might need to bring another one in to be doing the maintenance. Next one, tier 2 opportunities, essentially subcontracting part of your service. So typically between a large tier 1 and a smaller tier 2 SME. Similarly, it is the easiest way in. Experience is really important in the public sector. No one wants to be the first one to be testing it out with you. It's a really great way to gain that experience and build up some case studies. Along with building up your experience, it gives you opportunities to build relationships with the public sector and get their help to expand at other organisations. So for example, their district councils or their local health boards. But of course, you are reliant on others. You'll only have as much information as they share with you, which can make it a lot harder to be winning more work. Payment terms and other benefits are of course foregone. Similar to partnerships, there's naturally going to be a hit on the revenue that you're making. Finally, option 6, under threshold, out of scope, i.e. your product or service falls outside of the procurement rules which require competition, usually because you've priced it low enough to be done on a quote basis. This is, of course, a really great way to get your foot in the door and start building those relationships. You can start selling additional services or products later along the line and find out directly from the buyer what makes it comfortable and what routes that they like to take. Of course, you're also avoiding a lengthy procurement process, meaning no competition. And again, it's just a quicker way for you to be boosting your revenue. But you can only do low value work. Like I said, there's a threshold which requires competition. This depends on what area of the public sector you're trying to sell to. It does then mean that you can't win those chunky deals. And we know there's a certain value that gets certain salespeople out of bed. You can also struggle with finding and speaking to the right people. It's essentially direct sales and we're talking about, and it can be hard to find the senior stakeholders. That's a very high level view of the 6 routes, but don't jump off here. It's really important to understand that every part of the public sector is different. Even if you focus on one area of the public sector, for example, local authorities, selling to one council can be very different to selling to another one. The next part of this webinar is going to be focused on research to understand your customer, getting the data in place to inform these decisions, and then how can you action this? So firstly, a mind shift is needed. Don't bid on tender after tender, wondering why you're never winning anything. To start scaling up your public sector sales strategy, recommendation is you put in a new way of thinking, particularly a customer-centric way of thinking. You need to turn your sales team into listeners, learn about your target customers, and focus on building relationships. What are their specific needs and their pain points? What pressure are they under? What makes them feel comfortable in the selling process, whether it's specific agreements that they're used to using? And are you speaking to the right people? You also need to be changing the way you're marketing them to be really personable. Remember, quality over quantity is always preferred. Put together a launch and promo emails about the services that they can work with you on. So for example, specific frameworks and DPSs that you're on. Put together some videos and case studies and fact sheets. It's a really great way of spreading it in accessible formats. It also means that you can start using the language they're using, and you can have different materials for different areas of the public sector. You'll want, for example, to have some case studies with the NHS, some with different councils, all uniquely focused on your offering to help them. You might also want to put in tailored websites and landing pages, which make them feel like your product or service is really designed to them and their pain points. You shouldn't have the same website pages for selling to the public sector as you would for the private sector. It will make you feel like their solution isn't for them. You could even go further and do this based on specific areas of the market, so NHS versus local government, or even on specific job roles. Some of you are probably feeling like this guy right now. You know the research is needed, but you're unsure of where to start. You can use free government tools to gather this insight, but it can be really time consuming. And since procurement rules require buyers to be publishing in different portals, it also means that you need to do a lot of legwork to dedupe all of it to actually get that single source of information there. As such, to show you exactly the types of research and searches that I would do, I'm going to use our platform, Tussell, to make this a lot quicker. Let's drill into what the data says. Firstly, should I tender? What I'm doing here is I'm looking for any tenders which contain Adobe as a keyword, and I'm also making sure that it's for software package and information systems. Here I can see 21 tenders, and if I jump to contract awards, I can see over 100 more, which means if you wanted to sell Adobe, you shouldn't be focusing on tenders, but instead looking for framework agreements where we are seeing a greater deal of awards. So building on that, how would I grow within a specific framework or DPS? What I'm going to use here is Tussell's frameworks analysis module. I'm going to have a quick look at how many opportunities which were previously awarded via G-Cloud have an end date in the next 12 months. This is how you would build a pipeline. By using the bio ranking, I can see who should I be speaking to. And I'm going to drill into HR and human resources as a software. Here I can see 17 buyers who I should proactively be engaging about. And again, it's important to remember G-Cloud is infamous for its no tender structure. So what about a specific account? So in this case, again, I'm using the frameworks analysis module, and I want to gain an understanding about NHS Digital. It's a big purchaser in central government. And here I can see, well, what routes to market does it like to take? What's really interesting here is NHS Digital is using frameworks more than it's going out to tender. And if you look at all of its work that it's awarded in the last 6 months, it's really stark. If you're not on digital capability for health, you are not going to be able to get a share of that 120 million going through that agreement. That again starts helping us focus on what agreements do I need to get on? Perhaps I need to partner with a certain supplier already on the existing agreement. And with this in mind, let's say I want to learn a bit more about a certain one, your competition. So here I'm having a look at contracts which were previously awarded to a supplier called Workday. Here I can then build a picture of how are they going to market? And again, what are the framework agreements they're winning business off? Here we can see data and application solutions is a big one. But actually, if you then drill into local government, we can really start seeing how different areas of the market are favoring different routes. Next one. If you're looking to find partnerships and contractors, you'll want to build a picture of their business. Here we can have a look at one of the large suppliers, Mighty. Let's build a picture of what opportunities Mighty has expiring in the next 12 months. You would want to then say, as an SME, how can I be joining up, helping Mighty deliver these services as a subcontractor there? Equally, if I was Mighty, I might want to flip this and say, well, let's build a picture of some of the SMEs that have been winning business. Again, we can see what opportunities are expiring in the next 12 months. We could even drill into a specific service line. Let's say Mighty needs help with its security services. Here we can see 84 million worth of contracts. And again, who are the 79 organizations which I should actually be speaking to? Next one, how can I be selling direct? So this is focusing on the under-threshold opportunities. Here, I'm now using a different part of Tussell, our decision maker module. Let's say that I want to find the senior stakeholders at university organizations. Here I could, let's say, drill into IT and digital if I'm looking to sell our software, Tussell. And of course, I want to see those with an email. And I can even drill in further and find out the specific job roles. That's how I'm always speaking to anyone that heads up technology or their digital or anything that's transformative. Much more quickly than using it in those free tools. And if you'd like a demo, please do go on to our website and you can book one directly there. Now you've started rethinking your mindset and gathering the data to really be supporting the strategy. Of course, what next? Simplest answer, start doing some reading. Start off on a macro level. Have a look at those bigger government priorities. So for example, some spending reviews where you can see major funding that's about to come. And one of the most recent ones we saw, the HMRC, for example, was promised a bigger amount of budget essentially to scale up its cyber security. Again, a really early signal. If I was a cyber supplier, I'd put them at the top of my prospect list. You can also start looking at procurement policy notes. These are policies directly from the Cabinet Office to procurement teams. And we've seen some really interesting ones in the last couple of years. So for example, requiring a carbon reduction plan from suppliers for some of those major deals, also reserving low value work to UK-based suppliers. Another one you might want to look at is IPA pipelines, so the Infrastructure Project Authority. It's unstructured data about upcoming major procurements, and more public sector bodies are going to start putting this together. We actually wrote a blog on that, which I've included. Another one for a great macro view is the sourcing playbook. It's a really good way to get an understanding of government risks and priorities in procurement. And finally, of course, government budgets. It's a really nice and easy way to start prioritizing your account list. And then you can start drilling into the specific routes that they would like to take. The more budget they have, really, the better luck that you're going to have to get them to buy your services. And then, of course, do a deep dive on your account. Do not stop at the macro level. Have a look at things like the meeting minutes, strategy papers, big project reviews. I included one from the Gigabyte program, for example. You can also see what they're posting on their socials. So here we can see a digital strategy by Birmingham City Council. This will be really specific to the target customer you're trying to sell to, and you can start really learning the language that they're using. You'll also want to be signing up to the experts on the public sector to help you keep on top of these new priorities, new purchasing mechanisms, so let's say launches of big frameworks and DPS, and of course events where you can meet the decision makers involved in the procurement. Some great ones include Institute for Government, Civil Service World, SIP Supply Chain Management, Public Technology, HSJ, and Teleco Titans. There's so many different ones. Do research the best ones in your sector and get the whole team to sign up. Also, check out our podcast. The one I've added here, just at the bottom left, it's all about building relationships in the public sector. We did this with cloud booking and our head of marketing. It really touches on a lot of the points that I've spoken about today. Of course, also read some tailored guides to help you grow. So some of the ones that I've included here is growing as our SME guide, really, to be doing business with the public sector, how to overcome the barriers. And I've also included Disrupt to Win. It's from our friends at Harmonic. It's a really good paper about how you can really be a disruptor in this market. And again, just not waiting for tenders. Put together a checklist. The list will vary depending on the route that you're going to take, but at a very basic level, you need to be signing up for these public sector portals and creating alerts, or of course, getting a market intelligence tool such as us. You'll want to get the relevant security requirements to bid. Some are more stringent than others, particularly if you're working with mod. Create a list of your prospects and their core stakeholders, so you make sure that you're speaking with the right people. Of course, put together some targeted content on their pain points and really make sure that you're using their language. Educate them, particularly if you're using an agreement that they've never used before. You want to make sure that they feel comfortable with it and they understand the purchasing routes. And of course, make it easy for you to do business with them. Focus on getting experience, work with the buyer to help build this out. It's something that we really touch on in that podcast I mentioned. No one really wants to be the first one to risk it with you. So as I said, getting that experience is really important. And make sure you don't stop there. Create a feedback loop and make sure that you're continuously keeping on learning. We've done this feeding into product, but it really works with anyone delivering the service there. And finally, some of the changes which we're going to see with the Procurement Bill, which, as I mentioned, is currently making its way through the House of Lords. And this will impact the routes to market that you focus on. Firstly, they're simplifying the procurement routes available to the buyer that we inherited from EU regulations. A total of 7 is essentially just going to be narrowed down to 3. This should speed up the routes that you want to be taking. Essentially, we're finding the right one to take. Also, we are going to see a rise in earlier engagement. Public sector buyers spending more than 100 million a year will essentially be publishing pipeline notices with the aim of earlier engagement. Make sure that you're looking for any sign as to which routes they're going to take. Secondly, we're expected to see a rise in DPS agreements with the introduction of a new DPS Plus. It can essentially be used for all types of goods and services. This change is an attempt to open up these types of arrangements, which, as I said earlier, are not really used in every sector, and we currently have more fairly narrowed services being used. It also is with the aim of increasing innovation. For suppliers wanting to win work on DPSs, this is great news. But on the other hand, for those who are very used to winning work without challenge from relatively safety of a framework, things are not so rosy. Frameworks are likely to remain an excellent route into the public sector, but you can definitely expect more competition to be fierce and be absolutely more frequent. Thirdly, a debarment register is going to be set up. This is important, as if you get on that register, you're going to be locked out of bidding on contracts, regardless of the route that you take. An example of why you might be disbarred includes continuous poor performance on the delivery of public sector work. And finally, the ability to reserve below threshold opportunities for UK suppliers, SMEs, and social enterprises. It's already being done in the US. The concept is called set-aside contracts. And it's a big change in the UK, particularly as we've departed from the EU. This is great news for UK suppliers bidding on work, but it will definitely impact foreign suppliers, particularly SMEs trying to get into the public sector market. Final recap. The right mindset is essential for success. As mentioned before, really start adopting a customer-centric approach. Data can really help streamline your selling process. You should be making these decisions based off the hard facts. Follow the money, not your intuition. Success in the public sector requires an active rather than passive approach. I can't tell you how many times people will join us as customers and they're so used to doing tender after tender. Once you start really focusing on building out a pipeline, engaging early, you can really transform your sales. And finally, the most successful firms are investing in their people, processes, and systems. That's all, folks. Thanks for joining me today. If you have any feedback, please drop me a message on LinkedIn. Same with any questions, and I'll get back to you. I hope you all have lovely days.